The rain came down harder than I'd ever heard before, hammering the windows like impatient fingers drumming a warning on a table. Each droplet raced its neighbor down the cold glass in frantic, silvery trails, distorting the outside world into a shifting blur of motion and shadow. My own breath fogged up the pain as I leaned closer, tracing faint circles with my fingertip without even realizing it. My parents had left in a hurry, something about an emergency at work, and they promised they'd be back soon. But as the hours dragged on, their absence stretched like an endless hallway. The house felt bigger without them, cavernous, almost hollow, and every tick of the clock seemed louder than the last. It wasn't the first time I'd been left alone, but there was something different about tonight, something almost deliberate. The storm outside wasn't just heavy, it was relentless. Wind clawed at the trees until their branches shuddered and scraped across the siding like fingernails on a chalkboard. The darkness pressed at the windows like a living thing, and the air inside the house felt dense, heavier somehow, as if the weather had seeped indoors too. Every creak of the floorboards made my stomach tighten. I tried distracting myself with the television. The glow flickered weakly, a pale blue rectangle throwing jittery shadows against the walls. The static that interrupted the program only added to the sense of being cut off from the rest of the world, a white hiss like whispering from somewhere just beyond the screen. The lights flickered now and then too, pausing before deciding to stay on as though the power itself was trying to make up its mind. I remember holding the remote a little too tightly, my knuckles white. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, enough to make me doubt I'd heard it over the wind, but it came again, firmer this time, a sharp punctuation against the storm's rhythm. My heart stuttered. Who would be out in weather like this? Still holding the remote, I stood up slowly. The knock came again, 3 quick taps, almost impatient. Through the distorted glass of the door I could see a figure on the porch, a woman. She was drenched, her clothes clinging to her like a second skin, her hair plastered in dark strands across her forehead. It took me a second to recognize her, the new neighbor who'd moved in a few houses down. We'd only spoken once when she introduced herself, and even then it had been polite but brief. Yet here she was, standing on my doorstep in the middle of a storm, water dripping off her like she'd walked through a river. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see her face clearly. Her eyes were wide, too wide, almost wild. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It just sat there like a mask. Her lips trembled slightly before she spoke. "Are you alone?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. The question caught me completely off guard. Why would she ask that? Something about her tone made my scalp prickle, like she wasn't just curious, but confirming something she already suspected. I hesitated, my mouth opening but no words coming out. Finally I nodded once, unsure why I did it at all. She tilted her head slightly as though studying me. For a heartbeat she just stood there, rain dripping from her eyelashes. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Not down the street toward her house, but into the dark, toward the deeper shadow of the trees. I stood frozen, watching until the storm swallowed her up completely. She didn't look back. I shut the door quickly, locking it with trembling fingers. My heart was pounding, her question echoing in my head like a bell. "Are you alone?" I tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just worried. Maybe she thought she saw something strange. But the way she vanished without saying goodbye, without even glancing over her shoulder, it didn't feel right. Back in the living room, the television seemed even dimmer than before. The static hiss had become louder somehow. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting her to return, to knock again, to say something she'd forgotten to mention. But the only sound was the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. An hour passed, maybe more. I started to relax a little, telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just my imagination running ahead of me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. At first it was faint, a soft creak somewhere above me, like the settling of the house. But then it came again, heavier this time, deliberate. Someone was walking slowly across the floor upstairs. My blood ran cold. My parents weren't home, and no one else had a key. The footsteps continued, moving from one room to the next, steady and methodical, as though whoever it was searching for something. My throat tightened, my pulse thudding painfully in my ears. I bolted from the living room toward the front door, every instinct screaming at me to get out. But before I reached the door, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick, suffocating, like the air before a thunderclap. My hand hovered on the doorknob, slick with sweat. Slowly, against every ounce of better judgment, I turned to look up the stairs. I half expected to see a shadow leaning over the railing, a shape that didn't belong, but there was nothing. just the dark hallway stretching like a throat into the upper floor, the shadows long and thin under the dim light. I swallowed hard and took a step up, then another. Each creak under my foot felt like it would give me away. The air felt heavier up there, charged, almost electric. When I reached the top, I paused, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. My parents' bedroom door was slightly ajar. I nudged it open with my fingertips. 2 men stood in the room. Their backs were to me, shoulders hunched slightly as they rifled through drawers. They were dressed in dark clothes, black hoodies, dark jeans, and their faces were swallowed by the shadows. I didn't recognize them, but I didn't need to. The sight alone sent a jolt of pure fear through me. My mind raced, trying to understand, but there was no time. They hadn't noticed me yet. Every nerve screamed at me to move, to do something. I spun on my heel and bolted, taking the stairs 2 at a time, the railing a blur beside me. Behind me I heard the sudden thud of footsteps, heavier, faster, no longer creeping but chasing. They were coming after me. I didn't look back. My only thought was to escape. I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking so badly the key nearly slipped from my grip. Somehow I turned it. The door flew open, and the storm hit me like a wall of ice, rain slapping my skin and soaking me instantly. I ran. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, my breath ragged, my chest burning. My phone felt slippery in my trembling hands as I pulled it from my pocket. I managed to dial the police, my voice barely coherent as I tried to explain what had happened, the words tumbling out between gasps. By the time the officers arrived, the men were gone. The house was empty again, exactly as I'd left it, except for the signs of intrusion upstairs. Drawers yanked open, belongings tossed across the floor, but no sign of the men themselves. No footprints, no fingerprints, no clue who they were or what they'd been searching for. I stood there in the rain, the flashing lights of the patrol cars painting the wet pavement in red and blue. I tried to convince myself it was over, but the question wouldn't leave me. Not just the neighbor's question, "Are you alone?" but a newer, colder one. What if they hadn't really left at all? I've always believed cemeteries were places of peace, quiet ground where final goodbyes settled into the earth, where the dead found rest, and where the living could reflect in silence. For years I clung to that belief. Every Sunday without fail, I visited the grave of my late wife, Eliza. It was my ritual, a way to tether myself to her even though her presence had slipped beyond this world. The cemetery had become a sanctuary for me, a space where grief softened into memory. But one visit not too long ago, something happened that shattered the comfort I thought I'd found there. It was late afternoon when I arrived that day. The sky was a dull, featureless gray, heavy with thick clouds that smothered the sun. The air felt wrong for the season, colder, sharper, like winter had clawed its way back early. The wind cut through my jacket, chilling me to the bone. I parked at the entrance and began the familiar walk along the gravel path. Each step crunched loudly in the stillness, the only sound against the hush of the cemetery. As I neared Eliza's grave, I noticed him, a man, a few rows away. He was close enough to see yet too far to make out clearly. His posture was stiff, rigid. He wasn't kneeling by a headstone or laying flowers like most visitors. He wasn't even facing a grave. He was staring directly at me. Unease prickled at my skin. It wasn't unusual to see others there. Grief has many faithful visitors, but there was something unnatural in the way he lingered. He seemed rooted to the spot, watching. I forced myself to look away, telling myself it was nothing, and knelt at Eliza's grave. I brushed away the leaves and spoke softly as I always did, recounting the week, telling her how the children were doing, confessing how much I missed her. But no matter how I tried, the man's presence pressed in at the edges of my awareness. His figure loomed in my peripheral vision, stubborn and wrong like a shadow that refused to move with the light. I rose to my feet, brushing dirt from my hands, preparing to leave. That's when I realized he was closer, much closer. I hadn't heard his steps, hadn't heard gravel shift underfoot, yet there he was, advancing with deliberate slowness. My heart quickened. His clothes were ragged and stained, hanging awkwardly on his frame. His eyes, when they met mine, were wild, sharp with something I couldn't name. Anger, desperation, madness. "Got any money?" he rasped. His voice was rough, gravelly, stripped of politeness. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't have any cash on me." That was true. I never brought money to the cemetery. There was no need. His expression tightened with disbelief. He stepped closer, narrowing his eyes until they seemed to burn into me. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, Everyone's got something. Give it to me. Instinct made me shake my head. I don't have anything for you, I repeated, firmer this time, though my pulse thundered. He moved closer again, cutting off my path back toward the car. His fists flexed at his sides, clenching and unclenching, restless with restrained violence. The tension in his body was unmistakable. This wasn't a man begging. This was a man cornering. The air around us thickened, heavy with dread. The cemetery, my quiet refuge, suddenly felt hostile, as though the dead themselves had turned away. The rows of headstones stood like mute witnesses, offering no comfort. Give me what you've got, he snarled again, his voice rising, jagged with fury. His chest heaved with uneven breaths, and the madness in his gaze deepened. My mind raced. I couldn't fight him. He was younger, stronger, and desperate. Panic surged hot in my chest, but I forced my voice low, measured. I'm leaving now. I tried to edge sideways, but he mirrored my movement, blocking me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The tombstones loomed, hemming us in, the gray sky pressing lower as if the world itself was closing tight. I'm warning you, he growled, voice dripping menace. His eyes gleamed with dangerous intent, that glint of a man already teetering past reason. My blood went cold. He wasn't going to let me leave, not without giving him something I didn't have. The realization clawed at me. There was no reasoning with him. The fear I felt then was raw and absolute, worse than the day I had stood by Eliza's coffin. Without thinking, I turned and ran. Gravel scattered under my feet as I bolted down the path. I heard him shout something behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Survival drowned out every thought. My lungs burned, the cold wind slicing across my face, the gray sky above darkening as if echoing my terror. I reached my car, fumbling desperately with the keys. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped them. Somehow the lock clicked. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut, twisting the key in the ignition with frantic urgency. The engine roared to life. I looked up, expecting to see him charging toward me. But the space was empty. He was gone, vanished as if the earth had swallowed him. The only trace left was the echo of his wild eyes in my memory, and the echo of his voice still vibrating in my skull. I didn't stop driving until I reached the police station. My chest was still heaving, my hands still trembling as I recounted every detail. The man in the cemetery, his threats, his demand for money, the way he blocked me in. They listened, wrote down my statement, nodded. They said they'd investigate, but doubt lingered in their eyes. Perhaps they thought it was nothing but a vagrant, a homeless man gone too far. Days passed before they called me back. When the phone rang, I half expected dismissal. Instead, the officer's tone was grave. They had found him. The man was dead. They discovered his body in the same cemetery, buried halfway beneath a broken grave marker. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes frozen wide open in a stare that saw nothing. No signs of struggle, no explanation for how he had ended up wedged under the stone. It was as if the ground itself had claimed him. The police pressed me for more details. Did I know anyone else who had been there? Had I seen another figure in the cemetery that day? But there had been no one. Just me. Just him. And the graves. I still visit Eliza, though my ritual has changed. I only go during daylight now, when the sun is high and shadows cannot stretch so far. Yet even under bright skies, I cannot shake the weight pressing on me as I walk that gravel path. I feel eyes on me, watching from the spaces between the tombstones, waiting, patient. At night, my sleep offers no refuge. I dream of wild eyes glinting with hunger, of a voice rasping demands I cannot meet. And sometimes when I wake in the small hours, I swear I can still hear gravel shifting outside my window, slow, deliberate steps moving closer. We had been dreaming of this trip for months, an escape from the suffocating hum of city streets, the endless shuffle of strangers, and the buzz of phones that never stopped ringing. Jake and I had pored over maps, searched obscure forums, and finally found a place so deep in the wilderness it barely showed up on any trail guide. That weekend, the forecast promised clear skies, cool nights, and a perfect chance to lose ourselves under a blanket of stars. The idea of being surrounded by nothing but trees, wind, and birdsong was intoxicating. It felt like stepping backward in time to a world untouched by neon light or car exhaust. We arrived at the trailhead just as the sun began to rise, its pale gold spilling across a forest that looked impossibly vast. The air was crisp enough to sting our lungs, heavy with the scent of pine needles, damp soil, and something wild that city air never carries. Our packs were heavier than they should have been. Food, gear, blankets, a little too much of everything. But the weight felt like freedom. The trail was a narrow ribbon cutting through towering trees, their branches arching overhead like cathedral beams. Sunlight filtered through in shifting patterns, dappling the ground with moving flecks of gold and green. With every step, the outside world faded. No cars, no voices, no planes overhead. Just the crunch of dry leaves beneath our boots and the occasional call of some unseen bird echoing through the canopy. As we hiked, the forest began to feel less like scenery and more like something alive, something breathing. The deeper we went, the taller and older the trees seemed. Their bark was thick and dark, knotted with age, roots twisting out of the earth like skeletal hands. Hours passed without us seeing a soul. Eventually, the path opened into a small clearing carpeted with soft moss framed by dense walls of trees. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find in a fairy tale, hidden, secret, untouched. We exchanged a glance, wordless agreement. This would be home for the night. We pitched the tent on the flattest part of the clearing, gathered wood for a fire, and let the day's weight slip off our shoulders. As dusk fell, the forest changed its voice. The birds grew silent, replaced by the steady rhythm of crickets hidden in the underbrush. Our campfire crackled and hissed, sending sparks spiraling upward into the dark. Long shadows danced on the trees, bending and twisting as if alive. The air turned cool, but the fire's warmth wrapped around us like a blanket. We ate dinner out of tin bowls, talking about nothing in particular, relishing the strange comfort of being so far from everything. When the sky deepened to velvet and stars spilled across it like salt, we crawled into our tent. I drifted toward sleep with the sound of the fire fading to soft embers, the forest's night murmurs steady and low. At some point, though, I woke. No dream, no noise in particular, just a sudden awareness that something was different. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. The forest outside was silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of stillness that presses on your eardrums. I lay frozen, listening. Then I heard it. A faint crunch, like something heavy moving across the forest floor. Not the flutter of a bird or the quick scamper of a fox. Slow, careful. Jake's steady breathing beside me didn't change. He was still asleep. The sound came again, closer. My heart began to hammer. Every instinct screamed to stay still, but curiosity clawed its way up my throat. I unzipped the tent flap inch by inch, breath held, and peered into the clearing. At first everything looked normal. The trees stood like sentinels, unmoving, their trunks painted faint red by the dying fire. Nothing moved, no eyes glinting in the dark. I almost let myself relax. Then my gaze drifted just beyond the edge of the firelight where the shadows were thickest. That's when I saw them. Footprints, fresh, clear as day, large, human, leading straight toward our tent. My breath caught. They hadn't been there before. We'd been the only ones in the clearing. We'd seen no other hikers, no sign of anyone for miles, but someone had walked right up to our camp. Someone big. My stomach turned to ice. I shook Jake awake with a whisper, my hand clamped on his shoulder. He groaned, rubbed his eyes, and then saw my face and sat bolt upright. I pointed. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm. We both strained to listen. That's when the chanting began. At first it was so faint we might have imagined it. A low, rhythmic murmur carried on the wind. The words were indistinct, but the tone was wrong. It wasn't a song, wasn't a prayer. It was a droning chant, monotonous and cold, as if the forest itself had begun to speak. Louder, closer, coming from the direction of the footprints. A cold sweat broke over my skin. We exchanged a glance, our fear mirrored in each other's eyes. Neither of us spoke. The chanting grew clearer, but no less incomprehensible, like a language we weren't meant to hear. The hair on my arms stood on end. Then a figure stepped from the trees. He was tall, impossibly tall, and gaunt, his clothes little more than filthy rags clinging to a skeletal frame. His hair hung in long matted ropes across his face, but his eyes were hollow, empty, as if whatever humanity had lived there had been scraped out. His lips moved, still forming that same eerie chant. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the sound vibrated in the air like a string pulled too tight. The clearing felt charged, the shadows thickening around him. We couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He swayed slightly, his head tilted as though listening to something only he could hear. Then, without warning, the chant broke into a guttural scream. He lunged forward, arms outstretched. We scrambled back, tripping over ourselves, panic bursting out of us in shouts. Jake snatched a burning branch from the fire, swinging it like a weapon. Sparks flared as he thrust it toward the man. The figure recoiled, a low growl slipping from his throat. For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered, not with fear but with something unreadable, a flicker of thought or pain. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he spun and vanished back into the trees, his chant echoing as he dissolved into darkness. We didn't wait. We grabbed what we could, knives, flashlights, nothing else, swung and bolted. The tent, the food, the rest of our gear stayed behind. We tore through the forest, branches whipping our faces, our lungs burning. Still we could hear the chanting, faint but present, following us like a shadow. Only when the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon did we stop, collapsing at the trailhead, shaking and gasping for breath. Later, when we told the authorities, they weren't shocked. They spoke of a man who'd been living deep in the forest for years, performing rituals, watching campers who wandered too far. They didn't have a name, just rumors. We never went back. Even now, years later, I wake sometimes at night, the echo of that chant in my ears, the image of those hollow eyes burned into my mind. The ride. The storm was already in full fury by the time my shift ended, the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as pour, sheets of water hammering the pavement, reducing the world outside to streaks of gray. My wipers struggled to keep up, smearing the windshield more than clearing it. The roads were empty. It felt like the world had gone to sleep, leaving me alone with the hiss of rain and the hum of my car engine. I was bone-tired, 12 hours on my feet, nothing to eat but vending machine junk, and all I wanted was to drive home, shower off the day, and collapse into bed. The road wound through open countryside, tall trees bending under the storm's weight. Every so often, lightning split the sky, turning everything ghost white for a heartbeat before plunging it back into darkness. I rounded a bend and saw him. A man stood at the edge of the road, soaked to the skin, thumb out. His clothes clung to him, rain streaming down his face. He looked desperate. My heart stuttered. Every warning about hitchhikers flashed through my mind, but he was shivering, alone, in a storm that felt like it would never end. My foot hovered over the brake. Leaving him out there felt cruel. Letting him in felt dangerous. I slowed. The tires hissed on wet gravel as I pulled over. The man approached, head bowed, face shadowed. I leaned over and unlocked the passenger door with fingers that trembled. "Thanks," he muttered as he slid in, shaking off water. "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road. Gas station." His voice was low, almost swallowed by the rain. I nodded, pulling back onto the road, gripping the wheel tighter than before. He sat rigid beside me, staring straight ahead. Something about him was off, though I couldn't name it. He was tall, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes simple but heavy with water. His face was pale, his eyes dark and unreadable. Minutes passed without a word. The car felt smaller with him inside, the air thick with silence. I risked a glance. He hadn't moved, hadn't even looked at me. Yet somehow I felt his attention, like a weight pressing against my skin. My pulse quickened. I kept my eyes on the road, telling myself I was tired, imagining things. The gas station's flickering neon sign appeared through the rain like a lighthouse. Relief flooded me. I'd never been so glad to see a run-down, isolated stop in my life. "This is it," he said quietly, his first words in miles. I pulled up to the entrance. He opened the door, stepped into the rain without another word. The door shut. He was gone. Just like that, the tension in the car thinned. I let out a shaky breath, alone again. Then I saw the paper. A small, crumpled note sat on the passenger seat where he'd been. I hadn't seen him leave it, but there it was, damp and smudged. Curiosity gnawed at me. I unfolded it with trembling hands. "Check the back seat." My breath stopped. Slowly, as if moving through water, I turned my head. The back seat was dark, only the faint glow of the gas station sign reaching inside. My eyes struggled to adjust. Empty, or at least, it looked empty. My skin crawled. My fingers fumbled at the door locks, pressing them down until they clicked. My heart pounded loud enough to drown the storm. Why had he left that note? Was it a warning? A joke? Had someone else been in the car with us the whole time? I forced a breath, telling myself it was nothing but exhaustion and nerves. Yet even as I shifted into drive, the dread clung to me. The rain intensified, drumming the roof like fists. The neon lights flickered across the lot, casting jittery shadows. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a face in the darkness behind me. The road stretched out, dark and empty, but the feeling didn't fade. The note lay crumpled on the seat beside me, a silent reminder of the man I'd picked up, and the man I'd never seen. I pressed harder on the gas, desperate to put miles between myself and that gas station, but no matter how far I drove, the sensation of not being alone rode with me. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of that night, the storm, the man's pale face, the ink smudged across damp paper, and always, in the dream, when I glance into the rearview mirror, something's there,